Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be discussing the Riot Grrrl music scene and how it coincides with feminism. Let's start with discussing how I first came to know about the Riot Grrrl movement and the Riot Grrrl scene. I first discovered Riot Grrrl when I was about 12 years old, 11, 12, that kind of time. I'll put a photo of 12-year-old Riot Grrrl Ella here. Not a good look. I still consider myself a Riot Grrrl nowadays. Obviously I just don't look like that. Bands I was into at this time would be Bikini Kill, Litaja, I still can't say that name, but yeah, Babes in Toyland, L7, and I did like Hole as well, but as we'll go on to discuss, Hole was not technically a Riot Grrrl band. But those are some of the bands I was really into, and I'm still really into them now. L7 is forever one of my favourite bands. I think Fast and Frightening is like one of the best songs ever, and Bikini Kill I'm still a huge fan. What recently got me back into Riot Grrrl music and the Riot Grrrl scene was I was asked to do a project for school. I had to do an academic article and an academic poster. I'll put the poster here, for a university near me. And I chose to do mine on politics and music and how they kind of coincided. So I landed on the Riot Grrrl scene and feminism. While researching this project, I read lots of academic articles, I watched lots of videos, I researched lots of things about the Riot Grrrl music scene, and in that I read a book called Girls to the Front by Sarah Marcus, which was a really interesting read and a really sad read for me personally, because she discusses at the beginning how the Roe v. Wade court case was going to be overturned, which would ban women in America from having abortions, and how her and all these Riot Grrrls were kind of at the rally and were there when this was happening. And when I was reading this, it just made me very emotional, because obviously that's something we're facing in America at the minute. Women have the right of abortion taken away from them, and there's plenty of inequalities women face in the world still that girls were campaigning for in the 1950s, the 1970s, the 1990s, and still today. And that's why I think the Riot Grrrl music scene is a really interesting concept, because while it most definitely had its flaws, you know, it was very predominantly white girls, rich girls. Obviously there's always going to be flaws that come with that, but the general idea of their music and feminism was a very interesting concept. Whether it was a good one or a bad one is up to your interpretation. So this video is going to be kind of discussing what I found out in my research. It's not going to be an in-depth kind of detailed description of every single thing that happened in the Riot Grrrl scene, but just in relation to feminism. So the first topic we're going to discuss is, what is the Riot Grrrl music scene? Riot Grrrl was a type of music that came about in the early 1990s in Seattle, Washington, Olympia, that kind of area. It was following on from the 1980s, where rock music kind of portrayed the idea that women were just there for men's pleasure. Women only existed to please men, and they were seen as objects, and it kind of took us back in time from the freedom of the 60s and the 70s. So the music that Riot Grrrls sung was purposefully crude and outrageous, and they didn't dress like particularly pretty. They wore kind of grotesque makeup. Their lyrics were meant to be shocking and offensive because it was supposed to, sorry guys, the camera was tilted. It's supposed to be specifically offensive and deter men. It was not about men, it was about women. It was all about women, girl power. Girls in the Riot Grrrl movement would communicate through fanzines, which were handmade magazines that had all sorts of political messages on them, discussed meetings, and they were like little flip books that girls would make and pass out and share with their friends, which I think is like one of the sweetest things ever. Like, we do the same thing nowadays just with social media, and that's what I think's so beautiful about how times have changed and how we still have these ideals. Although the movement mainly stood against the kind of capitalistic and patriarchal views at the time, it's still, like I said, just as relevant today as it was then, as many of the issues the girls wished to combat at the time are still issues we face to this day. Now we're going to talk about the woman herself, the main Riot Grrrl, Kathleen Hanna. Kathleen Hanna was the lead singer of Bikini Kill and attended college in Olympia, where lots of other Riot Grrrls also lived and attended and produced art and songs and music. Kathleen Hanna actually wrote the Riot Grrrl Manifesto, which was kind of a list of, I wouldn't say rules, but a list of ideals that they shared and how the Riot Girls should act, what her beliefs were and what she was trying to promote. A direct quote from her manifesto said that women should face all of their insecurities in the face of big boy rock who tell them that they can't play their instruments, which I think she summed it up. That's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to go against the way men in the 80s treated women, the way women were perceived, and she wanted to be loud, she wanted to be offensive, she wanted to be rude, she wanted to get her point across. She wanted everyone to take note of her. In her manifesto, she makes reference to the fact that Riot Girls were considered reverse sexists, as in they only cared about women, they hated men, they wanted to put men down, which in actuality, she goes on to explain, her movement had absolutely nothing to do with the minimisation of men. Instead, it sought to empower women and bring women onto the same level that men were at the time. She goes on to emphasise the integrity of the girls supporting girls movement and believed that for women to become truly empowered, they couldn't belittle each other in front of the eyes of men. We had to stand as one, they had to be unified to go against these gender stereotypes. Another poignant quote from Kathleen Hanna says that you learn the only way to get rock star power as a girl is to be the groupie and bare your breasts and get chosen for the night. We learn that the only way to get anywhere is through men, and it's a lie. And I think that just about sums up how she felt, how she personally felt that she was minimised, how she felt women were treated, and how that we don't have to perform for the eyes of men. While Kathleen Hanna was a huge influential figure in the Riot Grrrl scene, she was without a doubt the perfect personification of the Riot Grrrl scene. She wrote the manifesto herself, she truly believed in everything she stood for. Due to the way the media worked in the 1990s, Courtney Love sadly became the face of the Riot Grrrl movement. And whilst I like Courtney Love, she's done plenty of bad things. I don't justify any of her actions, but I think her music is brilliant, and I think it can be miscategorized as Riot Grrrl because Courtney Love was there. She was in the place where the Riot Grrrl movement was happening. She dressed like the Riot Girls. Her lyrics were like the Riot Girls, but she was in fact shunned from the Riot Grrrl movement because she didn't stand with all their ideals and all the things they believed. She kind of went against it and became sort of an enemy for Riot Girls around the country. Like I say, while Courtney Love was assimilated in the culture of the Riot Grrrl music scene and was initially interested in its merits, like her counterparts in bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, she did campaign for women's rights and believed that women should be treated as equal to men, but her general way she went about it and her beef with Kathleen Hanna did deter her from being part of the Riot Grrrl movement itself. Due to her unignorable and loud personality, the media often focused on her outrageous outburst of violence and anger and aggression and branded her as, a man-hating heroin addict, and ultimately that became the way that all Riot Girls were perceived, even though Courtney Love herself did not consider herself a Riot Girl. And that did kind of lead to the downfall of the movement, because once the lead singer of Nirvana's wife is branded as a Riot Girl, and everyone knows how much of a controversial figure Courtney Love was, all Riot Girls were grouped in the same idea. They were all treated as though they were Courtney Love, and they could never break free from that stereotype that had been forced upon them. So sadly, once again, because these girls did not band together and unify, they became separated and they were torn apart, and their movement never really had any merit at the time, or so it seemed. One of the most interesting parts for me personally about the Riot Grrrl scene is how in Kathleen Hanna's manifesto, she decided to change the spelling from the typical girl to girl as grrrl. She felt that the word girl had become a synonym for dumb and stupid, and that women were treated as lesser beings just by using the word girl. She felt by adding these R's, it had a level of aggression and animalistic nature that personified all the anger that she felt to the world around her. And while this was not picked up on at the time as a particularly influential movement or an influential decision to be made, in fact many people didn't even take note of the spelling changes. I actually got told when I wrote my thing that I was writing girl wrong, and I was like, talk to Kathleen Hanna about that one. A lot of the language that originally came from the riot girl scene and Kathleen Hanna's movement can be seen in the way we discuss girls today. For example, the idea of girl power, which I'm sure we're all very well aware of. We all got taught that as a child. It's something we all use, sometimes ironically. Something I feel all the girls I'm surrounded by definitely embody. Girl power, you know. None of my friends back down. None of us are scared in the face of men, you know. We're all about girl power, supporting women. And that's what the movement was about. But that term girl power originally came from zines and manifestos written for the riot girl scene. That was something girls would chant at their shows, and I think it's a really interesting concept that many of us don't know where that came from, but it did come from the riot girl scene, which we tend to say had no real influence. Similarly, as I'm sure you'll all remember, No Doubt's song I'm Just a Girl became very popular on TikTok. No Doubt is considered to be a riot girl band, fronted by Gwen Stefani, and this song led to trends such as girl maths, girl dinner, everything girl. And this enraged a lot of women and a lot of men. Many women thought, you know, we were minimising ourselves by saying we couldn't do the same things men could, we had to make them feminine, we had to make them girly. But in actuality, people are reclaiming that term much like the riot girls did back in the day. By prefacing something with girl, you're making it purposefully feminine and girly, which is the entire point of the movement. If you proclaim yourself as girly, how can men mock you for being girly? And I think that's actually a really beautiful sentiment that was kind of, it wasn't picked up on enough at the time. It was kind of bashed immediately. And I understand from an outsider perspective, if you're not kind of taking it into consideration, how it could be perceived as feminist rather than anti-feminist. But whether it was progressive move or not, you can't deny that the idea of reclaiming the word girl came from the original riot girl movement. Similarly, as I said earlier with social media, it's a lot easier for us to communicate our ideas with one another through things like TikTok and Instagram and Pinterest and all sorts of social medias. We're able to communicate, and it's kind of a modern form of fanzines, if you will, or zines. And I think that's really interesting because I know plenty of creators that I follow on social media who promote feminism and girl power and all those things that we were trying to promote back in the day, but it's so much easier to do now with the rise of social media. Similarly, as girls in the 1990s were called reverse sexists, a term that likes to be used today, maybe not so much now, but over the last couple of years, was feminazi. As soon as a girl proclaimed to be a feminist, she was immediately branded as a feminazi. I know myself, I'd been called a feminazi many times, and I think it's such a crude term and such a ridiculous idea that because I want rights for myself, I'm being compared to a Nazi. Like, that just ultimately sums up for me the way prepubescent little boys think about women. And that's why I think movements like this are so important. You can't shy away from the fact that women are not treated equal as men. In many countries across the world, women go through so many struggles which I personally could never understand. I'm so privileged that my struggles with feminism are so minimal in comparison to what some women in third world countries are forced to deal with. Ultimately, although the riot girl movement had no real true success at the time, and it's a movement many don't even know. Interestingly, when I did my presentation of the riot girl poster and how it impacted feminism, there were plenty of women who were teenagers in the 90s who were looking at my poster, and they said they really didn't know anything about the riot girl scene. The only person they recognised was Courtney Love, which ultimately proves my point. But I think my final paragraph in my essay sums up how I feel and the perfect way to conclude this video, so I'm just going to read this to you. Whilst the riot girl movement itself is often forgotten today, we can see many of its integral ideologies still prevail amongst the women of today. Young girls can feel empowered by consuming media that campaigns for the rights of women and teaches them the true meaning of girl power. Whilst there are still many inequalities in the world in regards to a woman's place in society, we see that in comparison to the early 1990s, at the start of the Riot Grrrl movement, that the power and strength of women has only increased, as feminism today is still influenced by the Riot Grrrl movement. And that's all I have for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It kind of wasn't a deep dive into the Riot Grrrl movement, because if I were to go over all its flaws and all its negative issues, then that would be a very long video, and controversial topics that maybe I'm not quite ready to get into yet. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. If you have any ideas for any other music related videos you would like to see, please let me know. Subscribe, like. I'll see you later. Bye!